So the first question is, what is food safety? So in food safety, we are talking about the food will not cause harm to the consumer when it is prepared or eaten according to its intended use. That means for food safety is the food will not cause harm. Doesn't mean it is absolutely safe. The first thing is that, because there's nothing called absolute safe. It will not cause harm. So later on we will know that we are not saying it is absolutely safe. It is not causing harm. So the key word is that. And also it is prepared or eaten according to its intended use. It's always the fact is that if it is used or eaten not in the intended use, that may be a problem. So this definition is from Codex Alimentarius, which is actually the International Food Code. We call it because these two words itself is not English. So actually this means International Food Code. So before I talk about food safety, let's look at the food chain system first. In food, we are always talking about from farm to table. That means farm is the place to produce the food. All the food itself comes from farm. This is grow or breeding, all these kind of things, and make the food we are now eating. To the table, that means to the place where you put into your mouth. So we look at it, is that from the farm, it may go through several processes, maybe a food processing, and to exporter, shipping and transportation to importer, wholesaler, and then to retail outlet, and where the consumer buys the food, and then prepare to the table. That's one route. Actually, this is only one of the examples. Another route may be from importer, the caterer, from the wholesaler will get the food and prepare it and to the table. So this is another route. And you can devise a lot of different kind of routes. But what I intend to tell you is that actually from the farm to the table, there's a lot of people who handle it. They may be doing food processing, adding things there, or during storage and transportation, you may store it for a period of time, and you need a lot of storage means, especially for biological safety. So for food safety, we are always talking about we will control at every point of the food chain. And the simplest way is to control at the source. Everywhere is the source. Everywhere is the source. So in food safety, we simply know that there is the foodborne hazards. That means there is some hazards coming out from the food, Originally from food, then it may be biological, chemical, or physical agents or condition of food. Because why we get the condition? Because the chemical itself, maybe the composition of food itself, is a condition of food with the potential to cause an adverse health effect. For food safety, when we achieve food safety, we need to know the hazard first. So the hazard is whether biological, chemical, or physical agent. And biological is mainly the microbiological. When the food deteriorated, then you may have the microbiological contamination there, or contaminated by seawater, you have the norovirus. So for tonight, for this evening, I just concentrate on chemical agents because you are chemical local people. So for chemical agents in food, we will look at the composition and nutrients which is naturally present in the food. Additives is something we add into the food. Contaminants is something we don't want it to be a food, but it is present in food due to environmental problem. Residues is very similar to additive. Is you add to it has some function, but it will decay or deteriorate or decompose to remain residues. And that is the pesticide and veterinary drug residue is that residue. Then, apart from the hazard, is the inherent hazard present in food, then we will talk about risk. And these two terms are totally different things. Risk is the consequential to foodborne hazards. We have the hazard and we have the risk. And this is a function of probability of the adverse health effects and the severity of the effect. That means this is talking about probability of the occurrence and the severity. That means for the hazard, of course, it may be toxic. So for chemical agent, there's two terms. One is the quantity intake, and the other is the toxicology, or the toxicity. For chemical, for all substance, everything is chemical. All substance itself is a poison. You know why? Water is a poison. Oxygen is a poison. But you may think that oxygen is the thing to live your on. But the thing is that how much you take in is the poison. Now for non-wear, we are talking about 20%, about 20 or 21% oxygen is normal we breathe. But if you take in oxygen at around 40% or 50%, that's toxic. Definitely you will die. So when we talk about anything, whether it is a poison or poisonous or food is poisonous, we have to look at two things. Not the presence of the chemical. The presence of chemical is just toxicity. And we have to know how much is inside. That is your job. That means the analytical chemists come in and talk about the quantity to be intake. The quantity we intake will have two terms. One is the amount of the food consumed and the concentration of the agent in the food. Toxicology data is the toxicity. So all the things add together we will call poisons or toxic. So for food safety control, is the best way is to control the hazard at source. Where it comes out, we control it. Then there is one of the very means is called the Hazard Analysis Critical Control Point, HACCP principles. I will not spend too much time tonight to talk about that because it is chemists have a role here, but not too much. This is a management. This is a management issue. The other is how to manage the public health for the foodborne hazards. And the technique we use is called the risk analysis. Risk analysis is a science-based and a risk-based approach. There's three components together. One is risk assessment, and then risk management and risk communication. Risk assessment is we know the hazard, and then we know what's the level of the risk. And if we know there's a risk, then we have to manage the risk. And risk communication is tell people about the risk. This is all the food control, and it is what the Center for Food Safety is doing. All these three components. And for regulatory work, then we have the food surveillance and doing the regulation or the enforcement. We need to have the food standard and legislation. We need to have the standard. The standard is the Bilzhen. If it is not compliant with the standard, and in the news you say 超標, so the standard is that. And for surveillance, we will know the safety of the food supply and the general market situation, and we know how we can do the risk management. What is the control measure we can take? And it involves sampling of food, compliance testing, where the chemist comes in, and then the enforcement. Of course, before enforcement, we have to interpret the test results and do the risk management work before we do the enforcement. So a little bit more about the risk analysis. Risk analysis, I mentioned that it has three components. One is risk assessment. The risk assessment is to evaluate the probability and severity of the adverse effect from the hazard. It involves hazard identification. We have to know what kind of hazard we are facing. Physical, chemical, or biological at least. And then we have to characterize the hazard. This is actually the toxicology data. Comes out from the hazard characterization. Exposure assessment is the quantity intake. The amount intake is the exposure assessment. So, in the last two slides, I mentioned that this toxicity, and this is the amount intake, is the exposure assessment. And then these two terms combined together will have the risk characterization. So we know whether the risk is high, low, or medium, or observer, or maybe we can quantify the risk. Risk management is actually the art in risk analysis. This is science, and this is actually an art. So this is the process of weighing policies. This is a policy decision-making process. Select and implement the appropriate control measures, options. Because after you know the risk, then we can know there's a lot of different kind of options. What we can control the risk. The simplest way is do not eat the food or stop the import of the food. That's simple. But this is not always the not the good risk management option. So we have a lot of different kind of options. How to, and this is called policy. That means we have to look at the economy. We have to look at the food supply. You can bar the import, and you may result in no food to eat, or not enough food to eat. And naturally, this is a very well problem. It's talking about now it's not talking about just food safety. We are talking about food security. You know what is food security? Food security is supply of safe food. Supply of safe food. That means we have enough safe food for everybody. So that's why we have the control options we have to choose. Risk communication is exchange of information among stakeholders, maybe among the risk assessors and risk managers, and also to the public, or to the media. So the framework is we have the risk assessment, management, and risk communication. They have all interrelated to each other. So what is chemistry and food safety now? In food safety, we are talking about the food chemistry. Food chemistry, we have the composition and nutrients, which is originally present in the food. And why we take food? Because of the nutrients. And for the food, we may have to use additives and agricultural chemicals. That means this is the pesticide and veterinary drug. And additives, preservative, or processes, just like when you bake bread, you need to get in baking powder, or ammonium bicarbonate, or these kind of things. And actually, this is additives. And when you use these two agents, then you should have a technological function. That means you add in, you have intention to add in, because it has the agent has the technological function. But some of the chemical may be naturally occurring, maybe. The similarly, sulfur dioxide is commonly is an additive, or maybe sometimes present in food. It's naturally occurring in food. And for agricultural, we have to talk about the metabolites and residues. Because now for pesticides, we are always using very toxic substance. Not in the old days, we are DDT, which is not extremely, it is a chronic toxicant. But now we are very toxic, but it will decay. That means when we use the pesticide, we will wait for a period of time, we call the withdrawal period, before it decays to a low level. If it is not harvested, you will apply it again, and so on. So that is called residue. That means all the pesticides are toxic, extremely toxic. But we have to wait for the decay before the residue level is controlled. Contaminants is something we can control because of natural environmental contaminants. We may have the marine toxins, the cyclotoxin, the shellfish toxins. For standard setting, you to set the standard. And the food testing, you know more than me. Then you have the idea of test results. You have the test method, quality management, metrology, and interpretation of test results. So, exposure assessment. This is an important step in risk assessment. I've mentioned it. And you have characterize the amount of foodborne agents consumed by various population groups. Because various different population groups may have different kind of food consumption. This is the food consumption data. So we know the food consumption pattern of the target population, and we know the level of foodborne agent in food as consumed. That is usually by testing. So for this one, we need the food consumption survey to collect the food consumption data of the population. If you go to the CFS website, they had a food consumption survey some 5 to 6 years ago, and you can read about how much of the food, a particular food, is consumed by the Hong Kong population. And then with the food consumption survey, we may perform a total dietary study. That means we estimate the dietary exposure to the food chemical or nutrient. We perform it one by one. Food Research Lab is now doing a lot of food consumption, TDS, we call it total dietary study. And I think one of the report has been come out some 2 or 3 weeks ago, talking about dioxin and at least dioxin is there. What about the level of dioxin is consumed? So you can read that kind of report. So we prepare the food and then do the testing of the principle of the food. So one of the standard setting I put the example is food additives. How we set the standard? This is use level of additive in specialized food. The first is the industry itself. Bring out, they want to add something to the food to have an intended technological function. Suppose preservative, sulfur dioxide, or nitrite, something like that. We know that we need the technological function intended is the preservative. And how much is enough for you to perform the technological function? But keep as low as reasonably achievable. We call the ALERA principle. And this we call the good manufacturing practice. This is GMP. That means you have the technological function in mind, and then you add as low as reasonable to achieve this kind of function. Then, on the other hand, we have to look at what kind of toxicity of the additive. Normally, for additive, you have the ADI, the acceptable daily intake. That means taking in this level will have absolutely no adverse health effect. And usually, we times 100, a safety factor. The safety factor is usually 100 in this case. That means the ADI itself have a 100 factor, 100 times the no adverse health effect. And then we have to perform the exposure assessment of the additive based on the use level, that means this use level, and the food consumption data of the specialized food from the food consumption survey. And finally, taking out a certain value and compare it with the ADI. If this level does not exceed the ADI, the use level will be the standard. So the standard itself is not based on toxicology. It's based on manufacturing. That means exceeding the standard doesn't mean it's exceeding the ADI. Exceeding the ADI doesn't mean it is have a health effect because we have a factor of 100. Yeah. So testing and food safety. Normally we will perform two functions in testing. One is the baseline study for exposure assessment. For this one, we have to look precisely at the limit of detection because we want the detection is as low as practicable for that case. But if for compliant testing, that means whether it is exceeding the standard, then this is for enforcement and food control, quality control in food production. Then we have to look at the limit of quantification, because for court proceedings, we are not talking about how much you can detect. Is what is the reliability of your test results. So the quantity of the LOQ is more important, especially for the prohibited substance, because you say it is. You say it is found in the food. How reliable is your data? So we look at the LOQ in that case. So limitation of testing in food safety control is generally reactive and passive, of course. This is end product testing. Selection of test methods, then it is always called a fitness for purpose approach. I think in quality management you have mentioned it. And the intended use of the test result, if this time the test is for risk assessment or baseline study. So this is scientific investigation. Then we will talk about the LD. And for surveillance, this compliance testing, we are talking about LQ. And if it is quality control and trading, this is also a compliance testing. Test type, we may have screening method. In food testing, screening method is very important, especially you have a lot of sample to test. Because normally, most of it is compliant. If you go for very accurate analysis, then it is waste of time and resources. So you have the qualitative or semi-quantitative or quantitative or confirmatory. I will not spend too much time here. And then test requirement is the specification. Because now, when we choose the test method, it's always what kind of food metrics we are doing, what is the consumer range we need, and the LQ and LD. Other consideration is the volume of testing work. If the volume is too large, you may try to find a proper screening method or semi-quantitative method for a job. Turnaround time is also another factor, because screening method is usually very fast, but not too accurate. But if it is for compliance testing, that's good enough. So another important point about food testing is how to interpret the test results. Normally, based on the benefit of doubt principle, proof of non-compliance is beyond all reasonable doubt. So, test method, we have the measure uncertainty, we have to think about that. Recovery correction, we have to think about that, if this is compliant testing. Nature analysis is whether it's an additive, it is composition, contaminant, or residue, or natural occurrence. How to categorize food is another important point when you look at the standard. Another factor is the baseline data, the natural occurrence, whether the agent is natural occurrence, or we call it the hygiene factor. I have some case to mention it. Suppose we detect soap acid in steamed barbecue pork bun. I forgot the pot. Char siu bao. I missed out the pot. If you look at the standard organization series, it is not a special food for soap acid as preservative. It may contain benzoic acid but not soap acid. That is funny, because the industry itself doesn't need it. The reason is that. But if you look at one of the components of the barbecue pork bun is soy sauce, and soy sauce is permitted to add soap acid. So we have to take this kind of consideration when we see whether it is compliant. Formaldehyde in fish is another interesting example. Formaldehyde is definitely not a permitted preservative. But some of the fish species may have trimethyl amine oxide there. And after the enzymatic cleavage, it will form formaldehyde. So we call it natural occurrence. So if you detect formaldehyde in some of the fish species, don't be surprised. It is not being added. Because for non-compliance, they add it in rather than it is not. Here it is natural occurrence. So it's nothing wrong with it. Another problem is boric acid detected in soy sauce. Boric acid itself is not a permitted preservative. But boron itself is naturally occurring in all the plant kingdom. You know, the soy sauce comes from soybean. So you definitely have the boron being detected, because you know boric acid, the detection for boric acid is actually detected for boron. You are not detecting for boric acid itself. Boron itself, but the plant kingdom is a micronutrient. It is essential in plants. Heavy metal level in dry oyster exceeding the limit. The regulatory level based on fresh oyster with water content. So we can apply the dehydration factor. I think in CFS website there's one paper talking about the dehydration factor. So you can look at it. Nitrate detected in fresh vegetable, of course. Nitrate is not permitted in fresh vegetable. It is only in preserved meat. But this is natural occurrence. Don't be afraid. Just like bird's nest is another example. So as a rough conclusion is that the role of chemists in food safety, of course, one of it is a large portion of it is testing and certification. Is the quality management and interpretation test result we can apart from testing process itself, we have to do the quality management and how to interpret our test results. And then in food production and trade, the chemists can perform the product development, because for product development you need to have the food characteristic or the food specification for the food. Or after the development, you have the manufacturing, you have the quality control. Raw material you have to perform it, and the end products you have to control it. And compliance with the legislation. A lot of food companies will have the compliance officer just looking at the food and regulations overseas or locally and see whether the product is compliant. And it involves a lot of chemistry over there. Technical support to risk assessment and risk communication, the baseline study, and scientific advice for the risk communication, because a lot of message is very scientific based, and you need to explain to the risk communicator how to present the scientific data in layman terms. That's very important thing. And expert advice to risk management, surveillance and enforcement. That means also how to interpret the test data, or the food chemistry now come in. What's the action of a certain agent in food? Whether it is a natural occurrence, whether it is being added, what's the level? That means sometimes, suppose for food, you may detect 20 or 30 ppm of sulfur dioxide. Don't be afraid, it is not added. Because on the second thought, you will think, is 20 or 30 ppm sulfur dioxide enough to serve a fungicide or pesticide or preservative? And you have to rethink that, because normally over 100 or 200 ppm, it has the action over there, not at such low level. So, this is the end.
1名一家，1名6家。